Sputnik heads back to Ecuador this week, but not to discuss politics. Almost 30 years ago, Ecuadorian residents of the Lago Agrio region started a class action lawsuit against the oil giant Texaco, now known as Chevron.
An Ecuadorian court ruled that $9.5 billion in damages should be paid by Chevron for the pollution and contamination of natural lands. But Chevron to date has never paid, with a U.S. court charging environmental activist and lawyer Robert Donziger with contempt charges. Robert Donziger joins us now. Stephen, welcome on board to Sputnik.
Thank you for having me.
So you're joining us from your New York apartment where you have been under house arrest for more than 600 days. You have sit throughout the COVID pandemic, wearing a tag. You've had your legal license revoked. You've had your passport taken from you. And you've been described as America's first corporate political prisoner. I mean, surely this is not where you saw yourself sitting when you first took on the case in 1993. So would you kindly bring us back to the beginnings and tell our audience what happened, what you saw, and what led to this today?
Thank you so much. It's good to be here. It's a long story. I'm going to try to tell it in about a minute. Basically, I went down to Ecuador as a young lawyer in the early 1990s with a group of people. We saw an apocalyptic environmental disaster caused by Chevron. Deliberately, they dumped billions of gallons of toxic waste into the environment. It's been confirmed by various courts in Ecuador. We decided to file a lawsuit on behalf of the indigenous groups in the Amazon that have been victimized by these practices. So began an 18-year legal odyssey that culminated in 2011 with a historic victory in Ecuador's courts where Chevron wanted the trial held in favor of the indigenous communities. And that was for the amount of around $18 or $19 billion. The Supreme Court of Ecuador affirmed the judgment, but reduced the damages award to half that amount, about $9.5 billion. And once that happened, Chevron refused to pay. They threatened the indigenous groups with a lifetime of litigation if they persisted in their claims. And they adopted a strategy to demonize me. It's in the company emails. And as part of that, they got a United States judge to issue all sorts of cost orders on me, claiming I had done unethical things in Ecuador, which is completely false because the case has been affirmed by 29 different appellate judges. But this one judge in the U.S. ordered me to turn over my computer and cell phone to Chevron. When I resisted that, he charged me with criminal contempt of court, and he locked me up on August 6, 2019 in my own home.
Now, Stephen, there will be some viewers who would say, well, look, this is obviously terrible that you've been under house arrest for so very long, but when you were asked to hand over your electronic equipment, you should have done so. You could have avoided house arrest for nearly 2 years. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, the reason I didn't turn over the computer and cell phone is because it would have violated every ethical obligation I have as a lawyer to protect the confidentiality of my communications with my clients. I mean, this is a privilege held by people in Ecuador, not by me. So the judge deliberately issued this order to put me in a really tough position. Hundreds, thousands of lawyers in the United States have resisted these types of orders and appealed them without being charged criminally. I'm the first one. I did nothing wrong, okay? I did the ethical thing, which to appeal it, and I ended up winning my appeal. So what judge charges a person who's challenging the judge's own order, the lawfulness of the order on appeal, with criminal contempt before the appellate issue is decided? So this was all a pretext by Judge Kaplan. He's the judge who did it. I mean, this obviously is my opinion, but in my opinion, this was a pretext by Judge Kaplan and by Chevron. Chevron has literally 60 law firms, 2,000 lawyers they've deployed against me to detain me, confiscate my passport, and prevent me from continuing organizing legal teams and raising money that is necessary for the indigenous peoples of Ecuador to collect on their judgment. They don't want that to happen. They don't want to pay the money. And they also don't want these types of lawsuits ever to happen again. And they have used the pretext of the computer and the cell phone, which I handled ethically, to put me in this position.
Well, I joked in the beginning that, of course, this is not where you saw yourself sitting. When you won the historic lawsuit in 2011, did you really believe that Chevron would pay out and clean up?
Of course I did. I mean, first of all, Chevron wanted the case in Ecuador. As a condition of moving it from the United States to Ecuador, they agreed to jurisdiction in Ecuador. They agreed to pay any adverse judgment. And I did not anticipate the extent to which they would make up evidence and bribe witnesses, which is what they did with Alberto Guerra. This is a witness who they coached for 53 days and paid $2 million in cash and benefits to try to frame me in some sort of meeting where he claimed I bribed a judge in Ecuador, which is completely false. And there's no evidence that happened other than the words out of the mouth of a paid Chevron witness that has no credibility and has been rejected by 6 different appellate courts in Ecuador and Canada. So no, I did not anticipate Chevron paying a witness $2 million to come into U.S. court and lie about me. And I didn't anticipate either a U.S. judge denying me a jury and accepting that evidence is credible over the evidence of dozens of other people who contradicted him. No, I did not anticipate that. And you know what? How could you anticipate that? I sort of think the system should function as it purports to function, which is it adheres to the law and the rule of law, and judges are at least try to be fair and they don't try to take sides. But that's not what happened in this case. Judge Kaplan, in my view, and the view of many, was for all intents and purposes, a Chevron prosecutor.
Chevron say that Donziger, quote, fraudulently procured the Ecuadorian judgment against Chevron through a pattern of racketeering activity. Stephen, what do you make of that?
Well, it's a lie. I mean, you know, listen, Chevron has a multi-platform attack plan to blame me, demonize me as a way to avoid their responsibility for a judgment that they lost fair and square in the court, their preferred courts of Ecuador, that's been affirmed by Ecuador's Supreme Court and also by Canada's Supreme Court. Okay. So that's embarrassing for a big oil company. I mean, I work out of my apartment where I'm locked up right now from my kitchen table. They have 60 law firms and 2,000 lawyers. There's other lawyers working in collaboration with me. Okay, I'm not the only lawyer. There's lawyers in different countries. We all work remotely and we crushed them in court. Okay, so it's embarrassing. And they have spent massive sums of money to avoid paying this judgment. And so when I appear in the media, they always issue the standard statement and they rely on Judge Kaplan's decision, this judge who's a former tobacco lawyer who dislikes me and has been attacking me for years. By the way, there's a 50-page misconduct complaint pending against him, signed by 200 lawyers for his attacks on me. You know, he's a very questionable judge in my view. But he did rule that I committed a fraud, but you know, that's been rejected by 29 other appellate judges. So I'll go with the 29 and Chevron can go with the 1.
Stephen, let's go to Ecuadorian Amazon and tell us about the impact this huge oil dump has caused to the nature and obviously to the indigenous people.
When I first went there, I saw gigantic lakes of oil in the Amazon rainforest. I mean, literally, you come around the bend in the dirt road and see just this oil, like pools, like rivers of oil that had been dumped by Chevron. And, you know, the most shocking thing to me on that first trip, I mean, beyond the obvious humanitarian impact, there was a crisis happening there, a health crisis and an economic impact, was the realization that this was not an accident. This was a design, an engineering design done deliberately to save money. So if you look, for example, at the BP spill in the United States in 2010, that was an accident. BP put up a $20 billion fund within 2 weeks and ultimately paid out $65 to $70 billion. What Chevron did in Ecuador, an American company in Ecuador, was to deliberately and systematically pollute to the tune, according to court findings, 16 billion gallons of cancer-causing toxic waste onto indigenous ancestral lands. And the ultimate impact, and just one more quick point, is the people who live there had their water system poisoned by Chevron. In other words, they don't have faucets like many of us do. They don't have money to buy bottled water. They drink water from the natural environment. And until Chevron came, it was beautiful, clean, pristine water. But the rivers and streams have been contaminated. They're exposed to these toxins multiple times daily in the water they drink, the food they eat, the air they breathe. And thousands have gotten cancer and many have died. And it is a humanitarian catastrophe. It is slow murder, mass murder, that is almost imperceptible because there's no spectacular event to draw people's attention, but it's happening every day. People are dying.
And just finally, briefly, Stephen, because time has run away with us so fast, has this dumping of waste now stopped by Chevron? Is the future looking positive for the people of Lago Agrio?
Well, look, I'm always positive. I mean, but the future, I mean, the present now is worse than it was in 1992 when Chevron left. It's worse because the pollution they left that had been left at that time has expanded and broadened. I mean, pipes out of their waste pits running into rivers and streams, they're all still there. They're all still contaminating. And because of the cumulative effects of these exposures, the health crisis has worsened considerably. So things got better because the people won the case, but they didn't actually materially benefit yet because Chevron refuses to pay the judgment. Chevron sold its assets in Ecuador to avoid collection. And now they're, paying dozens of law firms to attack the indigenous peoples of Ecuador and their lawyers. And I would say that, when the main lawyer who's been worked on this for 27 years, who probably knows the most about the case, who has demonstrated successful track record of organizing legal teams and getting financing to do these types of enforcement actions that are necessary right now, when that guy is locked up in his apartment and the people of Ecuador are deprived of, one of their main advocates, that's not a great situation. So I'm hopeful we'll get through this. More and more of the world's people see the abomination of my treatment, including, by the way, 55 Nobel laureates have demanded my release and demanded Chevron settle this case with the people of Ecuador.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We'll have to leave it there, because we're out of time, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Now, James, this is the last week you're co-hosting the show with me.
It is indeed, but alongside yourself, our incredible guests, and of course the viewers at home, it's been marvellous. And George will be back next week orbiting the world on Sputnik.
You will, indeed. In the meantime, you can stay in touch with us on our social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's RT_Sputnik. On Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today.
Thank you for tuning in to Sputnik with me, James Giles.
And me, Gayatri.